From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you're following us. Sign up for our newsletter. Help support banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. Also, please sign the petition, politicswiththebigdogs.com. Also, all of the radio show and the podcast are on all the mediums, Spotify, Apple. Please download them. Please subscribe. Also load it up on YouTube, politicswiththebigdogs.com. Please subscribe and engage with the newsletter. So we have a really powerful show for you today, folks. We're going to do our best to get to all of the immediate topics that we need to hit, right? The U.S. Supreme Court, Paxton had a victory at the U.S. Supreme Court to ensure that our congressional boundaries are not, our midterm redistricting is not redrawn. And to that end, it is a strong contrast as we come into these final 3 weeks or so of the runoff between Senator Cornyn and AG Paxton for that seat. It has been brought to light that Senator Cornyn produced commercials in Spanish that appear to be pro-amnesty, certainly pro-DACA. A little bit unclear if that was for 6 years ago campaign or this one or a combination. They've gone and hidden them, blocked them on YouTube, but some of the conservative activists had already captured them, so we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss what this contrast looks like, what happened at the U.S. Supreme Court. We've got to give a little bit of time on this gerrymandering subject outside of the U.S. Supreme Court and how it impacts Texas, because there's so many states that have 40% or so Republicans, yet they have zero Republican U.S. House members. And that's not a mid-districting event. That's how they've been since the turn of the decade, right? So they just showed up and violated the law. I think that's why Texas acted, and then California and Virginia and others. But there was a number of states that had 40, 42, 45, 49% Republicans, and they have no U.S. Republican representatives in the U.S. House. Shocking. Got to give that some time. ICE got out in Houston, and your heart's gonna sink when you hear about the number of murderers and rapists and not alleged, convicted murderers, convicted rapists, convicted human traffickers, convicted child predators. They rounded up hundreds of them in 10 days. And contrast this with what the city of Houston, former Democratic State Senator Whitmire is the mayor, and their council said, we're no longer going to cooperate with ICE, and you and through your activities and this show and others, we believe that we have unwound that, and then we have got to stop and make sure we can get to the Southern Poverty Law Center. I thought this was more of an obscure organization. I've been having fights with them for a long, long time, much like Acorn before they collapsed, but I am learning that more and more people in America are familiar with them. They have been running false flags and setting up efforts, helping organize activist rallies on the hard right, and for example, the most conspicuous one in Charlottesville in 2017, where Biden said, well, I'm going to run for president because of this. We've got to stop this, aggressive white activists. Well, it turns out the Southern Poverty Law Center was funneling money to the organizer and then coming out in the news and saying this is why we need to raise more money to stop these type of organizations. They've been indicted in Alabama, federal indicted. Hallelujah for Trump DOJ to do that. So we're going to hit these topics, and we need to take a moment because the President of the United States had yet another attempted assassination. It is just shocking how badly the left and frankly the moderate right wants to get rid of President Trump. He is disrupting the one-party system in Washington, D.C. that kind of pats the rest of us on the head and doesn't affect change regardless of who's in power, D's or R's. I'm not sure what we need to do about it, but I want to hear from you. I'm open to it. We should take a moment and say a prayer for our nation, say a prayer for democracy, and say a prayer for the president, because there are so many people on both sides of the aisle trying to take him out regardless of how that's done. Whether they did the same to Charlie Kirk, and they were successful, and they missed Trump by what? Half an inch. And there is a through line. It's the radical left, and a lot of them have to do with transition, gender transition. The guy who killed Charlie Kirk and all the teachers who praised it, and that lady who pretended to have a gun, put it to her neck, and smiled, ha-ha. She was one of the teachers. Our public schools are just cranking these people out. Our higher ed colleges are cranking them out. But that guy who murdered Charlie Kirk was living with another young boy who was transitioning, and they didn't like what was being said. And, you know, the gal or guy, whatever it was in Canada that killed those 8 people in the school not that long ago was another unknown transitioner. February mass shooting in Canada, right? And there's a bunch of buzz about OpenAI and all these chat bots incentivizing some of that conduct and activity. But for whatever it's happened, for however it's coming, we need to say a prayer for the Secret Service and the folks who are trying to keep our leaders safe, because there's a whole bunch of Republicans in D.C. and there's a whole bunch of liberals who want Trump out at any cost, because they cannot handle being exposed. Same thing you and I are doing here in the Texas legislature, exposing truth. D.C., that swamp is gross, and they cannot handle being exposed or opposed. And they will do anything to include assassinations or funding hate groups to try to elect a Joe Biden. You know, the Charlottesville event that they're claiming. $3 million from SPLC funneled to hate groups, and now they've been exposed. And all these corporations who gave them money are being exposed. Not just Soros. I'm talking about mainstream Wall Street corporations, banks and otherwise. So we have to continue the diligence and continue the prayers for the sanctity of our nation and the ability to disrupt government, or we will have lost a beautiful democracy. A beautiful democracy. So thank you so much. Here we go. We're going to jump into them. God bless you. God bless Texas. Crazy, crazy world in which we're living. We're learning this more and more every day. So we're about 3-ish weeks out from the U.S. Senate runoff. John Cornyn seeking 25th year in the U.S. Senate. So he's been in 24, seeking to make it 30, versus Ken Paxton in a runoff. Wild things happening in this race. We haven't talked about it for a while. You know, Cornyn, of course, is spending $120-ish million trying to get reelected. About 60% of the folks who voted in the Republican primary voted against him. I believe Cornyn got 41%. Paxton got like 40-ish percent, so roughly a point separating. But lots of action in the last week, 10 days. In particular, Senator Cornyn's campaign apparently produced and ran 2 different ads, all in Spanish. And my Spanish isn't that good, but it sure sounds like pro-amnesty. They got caught trying to get votes for the runoff from Spanish-speaking voters and leaning toward amnesty, certainly leaning toward aggressively leaning toward soft immigration policies and trying to grab some votes there. And then contrast that with Paxton's just been hitting winners here the last several days, right? So he wins the Texas redistricting battle at the U.S. Supreme Court. We are set to keep our U.S. House districts. Paxton launches an investigation into CDL schools in Texas, right? So what happened is Trump came out, as we've talked about many times in the past. We have all these foreign truck drivers driving on foreign CDLs. You don't know if they were trained, can't read English, can't speak English. As a reminder, this was a big policy issue that the folks are at TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform. The current Texas law says, hey, if you can't speak or read English, the jury automatically knows that if you cause a crash. They got Jeff Leach there. Hey, what do I eat for lunch? TLR, Jeff Leach and Tepper and a bunch of these other moderates to whom they'd given $1 million+ to push a bill that said, we're going to change the law. We're going to protect these drivers. They cause a crash and they can't speak English, can't read English, or on foreign CDL. Jury doesn't automatically learn that. So just awfully big exposure point. A whole bunch of conservatives got suckered. TLR has been batting cleanup on that, trying to blame it on Dan Patrick, blame it on everybody else. But anyone in Austin knows it's their bill. So anyway, fast forward and President Trump comes out in the middle of the fight, the legislative fight, and really exposes TLR and says, hey, I'm using my executive order. There's so many crashes of people who can't read or speak English from all different countries driving these 70,000-pound weapons. We're making it illegal. Executive order, and you got to enforce these policies. So Governor Abbott ultimately did. I think he waited until after the legislative session, and now it turns out these CDL schools aren't honoring it. They're running commercials in Spanish in Texas saying, "Hey, come and get your CDL. You can become a truck driver. You can make all this money." They're not ensuring that people can read and speak English. So Paxton comes out and launches a big investigation. All in the last few days. You get Paxton winning the Supreme Court. You get Paxton investigating foreign truck drivers against TLR and Jeff Leach and Tepper and some of these people who we all believe just got swept into it, didn't understand was in the bill, to be real fair to everyone. And also, Paxton launches into Austin ISD. Go figure, right? The radical capital of Austin. Their school district continues apparently to let boys in high school who identify as a girl or an unknown gender or something else use the girls' bathroom, right? Again, we thought we banned this stuff years ago. You and I and others went to the fight, and it's still happening, right? We thought we banned CRT and DEI, and we're learning it's still happening. All these Republicans are voting in budgets. It's even mandating how many minorities graduate from different universities and how many minorities goals. They're saying you've got to seek to achieve 37% of your medical students in Texas public universities who are medical schools shall be racial minorities, and then next year it needs to be 38 or 39. So they're just getting exposed left and right. But back to this Senate Cornyn thing, it's shocking, right? It's just shocking, and it does appear that Senator Cornyn's campaign produced and advanced at least 2 commercials in Spanish, leaning toward amnesty, certainly toward pro-immigrant and illegal immigrant legislation, which has been thematic through his career. Let's be square about it. He's been that profile of person. But once it started going around the internet and somebody sent it to me and some others saw it, they blocked it. They went to YouTube and blocked it and made it private, not public. So that's shocking. Some patriots grabbed it and still kept it out. But the contrast to these last 3.5 weeks of what's going on in the Senate primary runoff is just shocking, right? D.C. pushing so much money into Cornyn and just policy exposure after policy exposure, and the contrast of Paxton and Cornyn among the conservatives is so strong. We'll have to see what happens. My strong belief is Paxton's very favored in that race, but we spend $125 million. Lots of things can happen. So let's find some of this and let's listen to it. So I've teed up one of these spots. Maybe it's actually not from this election cycle, but the last election cycle. I'm a little bit unclear on it, but clear as day. John Cornyn in Spanish, all about dreamers, and then he closes, "Hey, I'm John Cornyn, I approve this message." There's a couple of them that have been floating around, and it's very evident to me, at least, that they are pursuing votes among dreamers, or potential dreamers, of people who only speak Spanish, primarily speak Spanish, and are focused on amnesty and or some version of their DACA or otherwise. So again, my Spanish isn't great, and there's some confusion about this, in part because the Cornyn campaign they blocked it all and hid it. Made it not available, but some people had already pulled it down. So I'm going to at least start one of them.
Apoya firmemente la legalización de los dreamers.
I'm John Cornyn, and I approve this message.
Apoya firmemente la legalización de los dreamers.
So clear as day, right? Lucha para Cornyn, Dreamers is in there. It's all in Spanish. That's his close. And I'm troubled in part because he's been, pretty clear for like 24 years of his career that he's a much more moderate Republican fella. He was pretty close to being U.S. Senate leader, as I understand it. Of course, he ran for it, and I think it was second or third, but he has a big power base in the Senate. Of course, the Senate is blocking all of Trump's appointments. They're automatic appointments. The Senate is doing a kooky technical maneuver so that it never quite leaves session. It's staying in session the whole time so that Trump can't make direct appointments when they're out of session, which is very common. All presidents do this, D's and R's. When the Senate is out, they make appointments until it can be pushed through the Senate. But I believe, and please go look this up on your own because I'm thinking and not knowing. I believe that this is the first president in modern history who's been blocked from that. And of course, they're unable or not choosing to move a voter ID mandate, right? The SAVE Act, or many of Trump's judges. So we had a real breakdown in the Senate, and I think it's in part because they're all circling the wagons on John Cornyn spending $125 million and more. So what we do know is unequivocally John Cornyn's campaign produced this commercial seeking Spanish-speaking support, and unequivocally his campaign today, or current campaign at least, blocked it and is trying to hide it from the voters. I'm unclear if these were both made 6 years ago or in this cycle or not. I'm a little bit unclear, but it's out there. You can do your own research, and I encourage it. So let's talk more about the CDL debacle, right? Like, particularly a number of schools in El Paso that are out there soliciting drivers, say, hey, come and spend a couple $1,000 and we'll get you a CDL. You can be a CDL holder and you can speak Spanish. You can go have a nice life. And one of the reasons that I've spent a lot of time on this subject matter is not only because it's important to me, guys, but I want to remind us and remind Tepper, Carl Tepper, the guy who always stands up and whines, Anthony, people don't understand that Anthony's a lawyer. No, I'm a lawyer, and I try cases, and in fact, I do a whole bunch of 18-wheeler and trucking cases, so I see the devastation, the harm. But also, 5, 6-ish years ago, I went to truck driving school. I stopped what I was doing for, I think it was 7 weeks in the classroom, and that's unusual. I'm 53 years old, and so I was late 40s and an attorney and all these things. But I was doing a lot of this work. I needed to understand it better, and I wanted to understand it better. I wanted to understand what these drivers were doing, what it was going through, how they were being trained. So, and it was full time. It was like, I think it was 180 hours of classroom, and I had to drive 18-wheelers up and down I-35. Incredibly hard. I mean, I have great respect for that, to do it safely. And I'm a thoughtful, capable, good driver, really paid attention, studied and learned the machinery, and also became qualified on hazmat, which was a extra qualification, and on liquid, right? Like driving a tanker of gasoline is different because the liquid sloshes around when you try to brake. So incredibly dangerous, incredibly hard stuff. And I had a number of people in there, some who struggled with English for sure in that class, but a number of them who struggled reading. We would read aloud sometimes the regulations. It was really humbling. For a lot of folks, the long haul truck driving is a kind of a job of last resort. Have served time and are felons, and it's something they can make pretty good money in and go out on the road, and you're away from your family, but you're also driving a 70,000-pound weapon right beside all the rest of us. So it gives me great pause. Anyway, Paxton launches, like much to the dismay of the Jeff Leaches of the world, the Carl Tepper of the world, of all these Republicans who got duped into just putting their name on TLR's bill and not understanding that, oh my gosh, I'm about to change the law from automatic admission if they're driving on a foreign CDL or not. These contrasts are just so stark. Here, closing days of this race, Cornyn's being exposed for all of these commercials being produced in Spanish over the years, and perhaps even this cycle, to induce votes in support of him. And Paxton's out there flying the Trump banner to stop CDL truck drivers who can't read or speak English or are driving on a foreign CDL. So it's right. It shouldn't be surprising to any of us that all of this TLR business money and effort is coming in against Paxton, number one. And then number two, it shouldn't be surprising to us that after 24 years in the U.S. Senate, a fellow who almost was elected Speaker or leader of the U.S. Senate wants 6 more years, right? And all of the D.C. infrastructure says, hey, we'll give you $130 million to go and get 6 more years. You can have a 30-year career. And who knows? He might come back in 6 years and I really need 36. So it's the contrast is stark. And Paxton's had some really strong hits of late. Obviously, the U.S. Supreme Court victory there with Texas redistricting, and El Paso federal judge had blocked it, but he just won at the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's done. And then, of course, he had to go and bat cleanup on things that the legislature told us were done. The men or boys, high school boys in the Austin ISD using women's bathroom. There we are, and you can find out for yourself. I encourage you to go and have a look. But this is a fascinating race that just continues to get more interesting, and we're 21-ish days out. probably 16 or so from early voting. Like, this is going to resolve itself really quickly, and it's interesting, and we'll keep watching. All right, folks, we got to move on to a next topic. So here we go. A slight transition, at least for the U.S. Supreme Court, upholding Texas, Paxton's victory there, upholding Texas's redistricting plan. It is worth addressing this again. So California and Illinois and all these, and Virginia all point to Texas saying, oh, we had to do mid-cycle redistricting. You know, I suggest that Texas did it in part because those other states had cheated so badly on non-mid-cycle, right? And so every 10 years there's federal redistricting in the U.S. House seats. Man, those states just abused it so conspicuously that I think Texas responded, and openly and fairly. Now, I don't know if the Republicans will hold all those 5 new seats, but I want to set that aside because here's what really is jumping out at me, and I want to make sure we're all aware of this. The number of states that have 0 Republican U.S. House members, 0 Congress people, yet Trump got 40% or more of the vote in those states. I mean, that's astounding. And there's a couple of them that got real close to 40, like Hawaii got 39.4, yet not a single Democrat U.S. House member. So many of these states, they weren't mid-cycle redistricting in response to Texas. They were already that way. Can you imagine? I mean, New Hampshire's a small state, but just imagine being part of the 48.6% of the electorate in New Hampshire who voted for Trump, and you have 0 Republican U.S. congressmen. 0. That's how gerrymandered they did that state to ensure only Democrats get it. And they did that in the 2000s. New Mexico, very similar. 47% of New Mexicans voted for Trump. I'm shocked by that because it means not more than 53% voted for the D. There could be some Green Party or other small candidates that got a point or half point or something. I'm surprised New Mexico is only a 6-point swing, yet not a single U.S. congressman who's a Republican from New Mexico. Delaware, same thing. 42.6% voted for Trump, not a single Republican congressman. Rhode Island, I mean, small states, but these add up. 43% of Rhode Island voted for Trump. Only Democrat U.S. senators. Connecticut, right at 40% in Connecticut voted for Trump. Really liberal places, right? Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware. Places you wouldn't expect that Trump is competitive. I mean, 40%. You can't say a Republican isn't competitive. They're getting 43, 47, right? Those are interesting numbers. Yet not a single Republican U.S. congressman in Connecticut. Massachusetts is crazy liberal, right? Mecca. But Trump got 38.8%. Not quite 40, but awful close. And how outrageous that 40% of the electorate, I'm going to suggest to you, not only identifies as Republican, but more of them identify as Republican because Trump didn't get all the Republican vote. Yet they don't have Massachusetts has not a single Republican U.S. congressman. And the same with Vermont. Now, Vermont is so nutball that only 32% voted for Trump, but not a single Republican. 1 in 3 people would vote for Trump, probably means closer to 4 out of 10 or so would identify as Republican in one way, shape, or form or another, yet not a single Republican U.S. congressman. And we're not talking about California that's doing this mid-cycle or Virginia that did a mid-cycle. Virginia has a lot more Republicans in their, and a lot of U.S. House members. So this was baked in abuse and has been all the way through. I mean, these other states, and it's just silence in the media. There's criticism left and right, and there's litigation left and right, and Paxton has to go to the U.S. Supreme Court because some wacko federal judge said Texas couldn't do it while Virginia and California and everybody else was. But I'm looking back to 2020, 2010, when these type of states that I just rattled off, which were 40 and 42 and 45% Republican, yet they gerrymandered in such a way that not a single Republican could get elected to the U.S. House. I mean, just insane Totally insane. So it dovetails a little bit, but I don't want us from the last one, but I just don't want us to lose that, or at least from the Paxton Supreme Court effort. I just don't want us to lose that. The other thing that popped up again recently was President Biden. You know, on the way out, he commuted the death sentence of 37 of 40 inmates on death row. That's just shocking. More than 90% of the people. I don't think Biden knew what he was doing at the end. And I'm not saying he's pro-death penalty. And frankly, as a policy, we can all have a big debate about it, and a fair debate, right? The sanctity of life transcend into this space. But what we heard zero about, and it gives me great pause and popped up on a radar recently, was that 37 out of the 40 federal inmates sitting on death row were commuted on the closing days of the Biden administration, when we all knew that he really didn't know what was going on. So fair debate to have on policy, but again, silence from the mainstream media or anybody else. And this was exposed again because President Trump started advancing an expansion of the death penalty, frankly, and the DOJ, and I believe instructed the DOJ to pursue it more often, and even potentially line up firing squads. So you never know if he just posted on Truth Social or really intends to. And I don't mean to laugh or giggle about the sanctity of life. More of that was just the aggregate of Trump and the persona that is Trump. Was it legitimate or not? Buried deep in that little like asterisk at the bottom of some of the information was that 37 of the 40 who had been on death row were commuted by Biden. I'm sure they did really horrendous things to get there. And again, we can have a fair policy debate, but the silence from the mainstream or the left or anybody else on those 37 commutations is troubling, period. I mean, the radical left is out there marching to defend all of these bad actors who are killing people and saying, oh, it's just white Americans, you know, suppressing them. They're fighting for their freedom as they slaughter people on the subways. Yet the commutations are just ignored and silent. All right, folks, you know, there's all sorts of bad publicity about ICE and what's happening, and I think it's a fair debate. I generally support ICE and most of their actions. I think they're in a real tough spot, and there's legions of people being mobilized by George Soros-funded money and otherwise. But it's a fair debate how we treat people and round folks up in America, and you got to make sure that it's not abusive and they're following the law. But here we are, and we ought to do a shout out to Texas Scorecard among some of the earliest and most robust coverage of this. So ICE focused on Houston immigration, obviously U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Houston's field office. They focused on a criminal event and rooting out criminal undertaking for about 11 days in the first half of April. And what they found was they rounded up 751 criminals who had been convicted. These were illegals running around Houston, 750 of them, who had already been convicted for material crimes. And 654 documented illegal entries into the U.S. But I'm not talking about soft convictions. 17 of them were child sex offenders, not accused, convicted. 6 of them were convicted murderers, 16 convicted drug traffickers, 15 gang members, and like around 70 who had robbery convictions, thieving people, gunpoint, you name it. A couple foreign fugitives sought for murder, and 10 or so who had done hit and run. I mean, these are convicted people who have then been re-released by our court system, many under Biden, but frankly, it's just happening. 10 or 11 days focus in the city of Houston, Harris County, and what do you get? You get a woman, Haiti Mercado Rodriguez, a 34-year-old MS gang member from El Salvador who was sentenced to 228 years in her home country. 228. She was convicted of 2 counts of aggravated homicide, aggravated extortion, and participation in a terrorist organization before she came to the U.S. Fled El Salvador because you're looking at a 200-year sentence. A female, go figure, a female, and they catch her in Houston. Gang member, 34 years old, MS-13, terrorizing American citizens, terrorizing folks in Texas, and a long history of this type of bad acts. Like, you start contrasting that with Biden's commutations, 37 out of the 40 who were on death row right as he exited out, whether he had mental faculties to do it or not, it happened. And those folks are now sitting in the penal system. And then, according to ICE, Biden administration let her in the country in 2024, even though she had these convictions, even though she had this foreign fugitive status. So she was arrested April 9th in Harris County and sitting in custody in Montgomery Processing Center, probably heading back to El Salvador to start serving 200 plus years. A guy named Nguyen, looks Vietnamese, Minh Du Tong Nguyen is the best I can do. A 54-year-old Vietnamese national convicted of murder in Houston in 91. He has carried a final order of removal in the U.S. for 25 years. Taken into custody by ICE in Houston, April 16th. Whole bunch who had been convicted in Texas, and they caught him running around. Manuel Navarrete Arellano, a 34-year-old Mexican national, had illegally entered the U.S. 6 times before being convicted of sexual assault of a child here in Travis County, the seat of the Texas Capitol. 2024 conviction. He was arrested on April 7th in Houston and deported on April 9th. Hallelujah, President Trump and ICE. Like, people are going to be critical of him, but I'm really dang glad that this convicted sexual predator is no longer in the U.S. Jose Ricardo Ortiz, 36, entered illegally 3 times, convicted of sexual assault of a child in Medina County in 2016, 10 years ago. He's here illegally, came and went without issue, caught in Houston and heading back to Mexico. Eric Eusebio Cortez, 44, convicted of aggravated sexual assault of a minor in McLennan County in 2015. Also had 5 DWIs, multiple drug possession charges, burglary, and larceny. Picked up in Houston because ICE is there. Brandon Hernandez Torres, 23-year-old Mexican citizen, crossed the border illegally 24 times. 24 times that we know of. 22 times during the Biden administration. Kept coming back, getting caught. It's just shocking. Somebody who does it that many times, they're usually a smuggler. So ultimately, he was convicted of smuggling people in 2024. Well, he was arrested April 14th, deported April 17th. So ICE, they've gotten a bad rap, obviously, but I'm very appreciative that these scoundrels are being pulled off the streets of Houston. 156 people have been arrested, had convictions of DWI, 108 drug possession, 70 plus for assault, 16 for drug trafficking, 15 of them smuggling humans, dozens illegal weapons, firearms, forgery, just shocking numbers. And they're walking around Houston as we send our children there for college or events or otherwise. How are we expected to keep ourselves safe if this is what's happening? Yet radical activists are out there protesting against ICE, trying to protect these people who have armed other humans, other Texans, other Americans, people in their own country who came here to evade lengthy, if not life citizens. And this is, let's remember the context. Houston, just recently under Whitmire, who had been a Democratic Texas senator for a long time, but very conspicuously chairman, one of Dan Patrick's few Democrats he relies on as a chairman. He became mayor of Houston and said, no, we're not going to coordinate with ICE anymore. Seems to unwound it because of people like you and I exposing it, and Governor Abbott using it as an opportunity to get on national news and say, well, we're going to pull funding from you. So I believe that Houston is unwinding that. But imagine this, instructing HPD, Houston Police Department, that we're not going to cooperate with ICE anymore. ICE goes out there and rounds up 700 or so convicted murderers and human traffickers and child rapists, people that have been picked up in the U.S. dozens of times. And if John Whitmire and the other squishy Republicans and the radical left got their way, Houston Police Department would not be holding people they believe to be illegals or those sought by ICE. They would catch and release. That is the state of Texas. Do not ever think that these rhinos in Texas will do the right thing or what they claim to support and do, because that is the reality, and it's why we have this show. Together, you and I can hold these people to account and ensure that our neighborhoods are safe and our immigration laws are enforced. We got to move on to the next topic, but I sure appreciate the people of ICE and HPD, Houston Police Department, who made a big stink when they were instructed by the mayor and the council to change that policy, and ultimately Abbott and others who helped financially incentivize that change in policy. So God bless you, ICE. Okay, folks, we've got to get to another topic. We've got to give some time to the Southern SPLC, the Southern Poverty Legal Center. Actually, I think it's Law Center. Let me confirm that. Yes, Southern Poverty Law Center. I've been having battles with these folks for many a decade. My belief was that few Americans were familiar with them, but I might be wrong in that. I think they may be better known than I understood. I've tested it by asking some people who are not terribly political, and many of them were familiar with it. So here's my take on the SPLC historically, and it's an organization that started in 71, so it's a little bit older than I am, has about 800 million in assets. It's set up, as I understand, as a 501c3, nonprofit, just like a church. And way back in the 70s and 80s, I came to know them and remember them being associated with taking on racial battles. And frankly, I think often when it was merited, when African Americans were being excluded from vote through one effort or another, right? But then they became more of a George Soros funded style entity, meaning that they were seeking activism. And there was a mass exodus in the 80s, in the middle of the 80s, a bunch of their legal staff, right? They had kind of been like the nonprofit style legal staff saying, hey, you're discriminating against this person, African American or otherwise, in Alabama for these causes, right? It started in Alabama. But now it works all over America, and it operates, from my perspective, much like the George Soros institutions, like this institution of funding for the liberal left. Well, they got federally indicted for criminal acts, and there's an awful lot of fascinating things that have been occurring about that. So they got indicted in Alabama for funneling money to hate groups. That's right, 3 million or more to hate groups. The same so-called hate groups that they're out there raising money to stop through the legal system and otherwise. And, this is a group that jumped back into prominence during around the time of the first election of Trump, as I recall. It was the Charlottesville event. Remember, the national news was just obsessed with Unite the Right rally and all of this stuff. And it turns out this Southern Poverty Law Center was funneling money, hundreds of thousands, to individuals inside the Unite the Right rally who were then actually organizing it. And what happens, much like many of the other organizations, what ACORN used to do, the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, would then shake down corporate America. So right after Charlottesville occurred and the SPLC was everywhere and in the news, and oh my gosh, all these pro-whites are in Charlottesville doing all sorts of things they shouldn't be, and we've got to go and stop it. We're SPLC. Okay, well, what happened? They went and they got Apple CEO. I'm going to give you $1 million. JP Morgan Chase, $500,000. George Clooney's foundation, here's $1 million. MGM, I'm going to match anything that you, the employees, give. Google Foundation, $250,000 the year before. Soros Open Society, $75,000 the year before for an anti-hate table. Well, the mainstream media wrapped Charlottesville Unite the Right around the neck of Trump, just straight up. And certainly there's white racism in America, right? But there's black racists, and there's every color. You pick a color, we have it. Millions have come in, tens of millions, to the SPLC. Well, it turns out that these guys got caught funneling over $3 million to these pro-hate groups, some of whom or pro-hate members of these groups, some of whom were helping to organize the exact entities, the exact events, like the Unite the Right in Charlottesville, that the SPLC is then going into the mainstream media saying, this is why we have to exist. This is fund us. This is what we're out there trying to fight against. They were given money to the people organizing. And as a result, they got indicted. And most of this money is tracked and whistleblowers. So they're looking at a federal indictment in Montgomery, Alabama. And again, just another entity of the left being exposed for helping to advance events that they can then economize, or helping to advance even fraudulent stories. I mean, it's another Hunter Biden laptop cover-up. It's another Russia collusion event. They're out there colluding the Ds with Russia, claiming, oh, the Rs are operating with Russia, and this is a Trump Manchurian candidate, only to be exposed, and only to be exposed as running false flags with the file, right, that the Hillary Clinton campaign gave. And now, similarly, the SPLC is out there spending millions, what appear to be in tax-deductible donations, going to members of hate groups to help organize these rallies. This is how far the activist left will go. They're donating funds to folks engaged with the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Nation, the National Alliance, and other so-called extremist groups that the Southern Poverty Law Center, is identifying as extremist groups. So they got indicted on 11 counts of wire fraud and false statements to federally insured banks and conspiracy to commit concealment of money laundering. That happened in the second half of April. What is happening in the world when people are this brazen? And they're turning around and taking Wall Street money, who then just increase the cost of goods and services on you and I, and they pump it into the SPLC. It is shocking. So, folks, I want to remind us that Joe Biden claimed, I'm going to run for president because of the Charlottesville, Virginia, Unite the Right group. I've got to stop in. I'm the only one who can stop this. Well, SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, paid about $270,000 to a member of the group that planned the Unite the Right protest. That's what this indictment says. And it's pretty clear. You can see a flow of money. One of them is like money from SPLE to a sham account to another sham account right to this person. Between 2014 and 2023, the indictment and the releases state that SPLC paid at least $3 million to 8 different people. So I read that as a total of $3 million, but that's $350,000 plus on average to those 8 people, who some of whom were affiliated with the Klan, United Klan of America, National Socialist Movement, Aryan Nations, something called Sadistic Souls Motor Club, Nationalist Party of American Nazis. They are taking what appear to be nonprofit, tax-deductible donations, just like our churches get, and distributing them to members of these hate groups, and then going out and suing the hate groups and or owning the media when there's an event such as the one in Charlottesville that we all remember, the so-called Unite the Right, that they helped fund, or at least fund an individual to organize it. And then Biden gets to step out and say, this is why I'm running for president, because this can't continue. We've got to stop this. I mean, the radical left using corporate dollars so often to create events, some that are real and some that are not, but regardless, they're helping to create to justify their actions. And in this instance, to justify Biden's candidacy, right? But they're also, SPLC is using Unite the Right and these other things that they're helping the organizers to organize, right? They're helping to fund the organizers of the events. They're using them for continued fundraising and to go to the JP Morgan and to go to the Facebooks and the Googles and give us money because this cannot exist in America. Yet they're helping create it. The fraud and the false flag actions, we have just seen such a pattern among the left. The laptop, right? Russiagate, Hillary Biden OPRI file that goes to her lawyer and then goes to an activist and spread all over the news and the national mindset. 330 million Americans. We don't get a chance to correct it because once it's in there, you got to go find all 330 million and explain it and unwind it. And the left knows this. So they will trade any amount of money for a big news story that goes viral about the hard right doing something inappropriate, even if they help launch it. even if they helped fund it, paid for the people who are organizing it. And now they've been caught and exposed. And thank God the Trump DOJ will do something about it, because more and more I am believing what many of you probably already know is that we have a one-party system. The D's and the R's in D.C. work together. And I believe that's why so many people are trying to take out Trump, why he's been shot at, and others have been trying to get him, because the D's and the R's are colluding together to ensure that no disruptor, and Trump is a disruptor, he doesn't owe his allegiance to either party, can come into their camp. They effectively fool us into believing that these Unite the Right events launched on their own by a radical right of people out there causing harm, when in fact they're being aided and percolated, at least in part, by the money and the effort of the left, so they can use it as a fundraising tool and a news source and electoral power and electoral advantage. It's so fundamentally wrong. And thank goodness the DOJ is stepping in and acting. And thank goodness people are exposing, like Acorn was exposed by a couple young kids with some undercover video, probably a few $1,000s, and boom, Acorn had collapsed. And now the fraud recently in Minnesota and other places on the federal funding, a few undercover journalists, and it collapses. Hallelujah. Here we are, folks. We gotta fight on and ensure liberty. We continue to advance liberty in Texas and beyond. All right, folks. We try to do this as often as we can. Tepper time. I remind us, Carl Tepper, that moderate kind of go along, get along Republican who got over $1 million from TLR, one of the Texans for lawsuit reform. So Tepper's up there in Lubbock, and he's been out complaining. Oh, Anthony is not making it clear that he's a lawyer, and he's talking about all these issues. Guys, as a reminder, I don't ever want to turn this into a commercial or an advocacy effort for myself. Yes, I'm a 53-year-old trial lawyer, and yes, I do an awful lot of 18-wheeler litigation, and one of the reasons I talk about this stuff so much is I'm so familiar with it. And I remind us all I went to truck driving school. So this is my disclaimer for the Tepper time whiners of the world who just can't handle being exposed and can't handle their constituents knowing, oh, wow, one lobby group who's C4 that doesn't disclose their donors, but they do have a disclosed PAC with has 50 million or so in it. They gave $1 million to Tepper. So is there any wonder that Carl Tepper is now attacking this show or advancing really bad policy like, hey, yeah, let's change the law for these foreign truck drivers. Let's oppose Trump. Let's make sure that the juries don't automatically learn if these truck drivers crash and can't speak or read English. So here's my obligatory Tepper time disclosure. We've got to give some time to the U.S. Supreme Court for righting one of the great wrongs we've had in our society over the last 40 years. We have institutionalized racism in the Justice Department and in our elections for decades. The Voting Rights Act, which sounds like this beautiful name, as it often does, the U.S. Supreme Court finally did the right thing, and sadly, they had to do it because Republicans were too cowardice to get it done. They knew or should have known that it was fundamentally racist on its face, but they didn't have the courage to go and act. So let's back up. The VRA, the Voting Rights Act, passed in 1965. In 1965, of course, we're in the era of Brown versus Board of Education. We're in the era of separate but equal. It probably had merit. It certainly had social merit. I'm still suspect of its legal basis, right? Because it fundamentally resolved election preclearance and election districts by race straight away. It was enacting racism in an effort to combat racism. That's a justification. Fundamentally, that's what it did. So it was a 5-year deal, 1965. In 1970, it gets reauthorized for another 5 years. And then 1975, it gets reauthorized for 7 years to 82. And 82, they do a 25-year run. So now you're at 2006. It's going to expire in 2007. And Republicans, including Texas Republicans, refused to strike it down. So what did it do? It did a pre-clearance mandate. Most of the South, but other states had to go and get permission from the DOJ to change their election lines. Alaska, not only just states, but cities. New York City, Manhattan and the Bronx, 2 of the 5 boroughs, they were under the pre-clearance. New Hampshire was under the pre-clearance. We had Edward Bloom, one of the great freedom fighters on this issue over the last 35 years, one of the courageous, brave, pro-liberty activists like you and I, who has led all of these fights for so many decades now. I met him in 1997 in Houston when we were contesting on racial basis that they were doing mandated minority contracts, the taxpayer dollars. So much like the VRA launched, much like our income tax, it's going to be a temporary deal. And then it just gets embedded into the mindset of people. And the Republicans were too fearful to go and say, this is racism. Here we are in 2006. I remember John Cornyn goes to the floor and says, we've got to enact this for another 25 years. It's, quote, a permanent commitment to protect the right to vote. What are we doing saying that you have to have all black or all brown or all Asian districts or primarily Asian districts? So it was struck down finally, and the pre-clearance got struck by the court in 2013, and the race-based mandates were struck down this week by the U.S. Supreme Court, something that you knew was wrong, I knew was wrong, all of them knew or should have known. The Republican Party, particularly in the Bush crowd and the Bush era, either lacks the ability to scrutinize constitutional standards or more likely the courage to go out there and knock them down. So the court finally did it, and they've been chipping away at it. The pre-clearance, the Edward Bloom's fair admission, Students for Fair Admission against Harvard in 2023, saying you cannot base your decisions on race. It's fundamentally illegal. It's fundamentally racist to base your decisions on race. So what happened this week is the state of Louisiana had a case, electioneering case, go up finally to the U.S. Supreme Court, and a group of primarily Anglo citizens in Louisiana said, hey, we're the non-black voters of Louisiana. We're going to contest this because they are drawing districts to ensure that an African American is elected to Congress, and that is discriminating against us on our race. And they're often not drawing these compact districts. It's how we get gerrymandering, how we get these long fingers and 40-mile districts connect groups of African Americans to make sure that the minority vote in that district will be great enough to elect, quote-unquote, one of their own if they want or choose. And in fact, in Texas, we drew a district like this some years ago, and an Anglo Democrat won it instead of a Latino, and there was all this outrage. Gene Green and some of the others, what are we going to do? We have to redraw it. Is it legal? They actually elected a white guy. That's wrong. It's not what our intention was. So courts kept kicking out all of these redistricting districts, saying, you went from 33% African American voting right to 32.5%, therefore it's illegal. Racism on its face under this notion to contest racism. And they went and they reauthorized it in 2006. And the R's, most of them got on board and praised it because they were so afraid to be called racist. And it just got embedded into the minds of Americans. It being the VRA, the Voting Rights Act, but nobody had the courage to say, this is fundamentally racist. We cannot, should not, and must not be advancing this in America as a standard. It is not in keeping with liberty. Fascinatingly, Samuel Alito wrote for the court, and in his opinion, he said the Constitution, quote, almost never permits a state to discriminate on the basis of race. I bet you're shocked to hear that, because the almost never, it means a state can discriminate on the basis of race. But clearly, the Voting Rights Act forced discrimination on the basis of race. And it harmed us in Texas because we had to go to the DOJ to draw maps, and they could say yes or no, or we think it violates, and contest them. It was called pre-clearance. It's totally wrong. And then one of the lines that I really enjoyed, Americans are individuals, not members of racial blocs. We are individual peoples. Hallelujah, the court had the gumption to finally take a racist law off the book, and every Republican just went along to get along because they were too afraid to call it what it is. Fundamental racism. Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, thank you so much for joining with us today. Thank you for fighting for liberty. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.